So lovely to see you guys and girls and everyone else joining this super impromptu conversation which I'm going to be having. Leslie, you're welcome to come up, and anybody else who is willing to join this discussion. We're going to be having about podcasting, whether we are actually reached a point that podcasting is going to replace radio. I'm very, very excited to have this monologue. I have never actually done a monologue. Usually, it's just me interviewing guests on my podcast. So, for a change, I had this thought in my head that what's happening to radio? Does it still exist in the marketplace? And I see a lot of advertisers, relying on podcasters and their content, and they want to monetize through those mediums rather than radio because it's expensive, stuff like that. So I'm here to actually have that conversation with you all, and let's see how this conversation flourishes. I don't necessarily have like a conclusion. We're going to be brainstorming together and coming up with this conclusion. So, just in case if you're new and if you don't know me, my name is Jason. I'm a podcaster. I'm on the Spotify's top 30% most followed business podcasts. It took me a really long time to make this happen, to be on the top 30s. I don't have a lot of information about podcasting. I still feel I'm a rookie, just trying to make it work. So not really the best public speaker also, so just bear with what we have and let's try to make the best out of things. So Leslie, I want to welcome you, virtually giving you a high five. How have you been? And thank you so much for supporting yesterday's show. This is just an impromptu, and I'm really excited to see how things goes ahead. So Leslie, I don't know, I didn't get you down to the listening lounge. You're welcome to come up if you are able to speak. Anyways, so let's deep dive into this interesting conversation, whether podcasting will replace audio by any means or no. Okay, now I want to actually pose a question, first to everyone so that we can think about this. Is podcasting actually better than audio or no? Okay, I know radio is pretty dynamic, and podcast has its pros and cons. Radio also has its pros and cons. But let's first ask ourselves, is podcasting better than radio overall? Now, the perks which I see with podcasting in comparison to radio, the most primary thing is on demand listening. You can actually engage with the content creator, whoever is doing podcasts, whenever you like, at your ease, by doing shopping, driving, traveling, in the flight, outside the flight, at your garage, okay, chopping vegetables, taking a dump also. So it gives you the flexibility to download and stream and listen and consume such content without any sort of hiccup. So that's one of the major perks which I see when it comes to podcasting. A second benefit which I see is that it gives the content creator not to really worry about a time limitation, like a time limit. Now, radios, as you know, when we do radio, radios do come with a limitation as to the content has to be produced, executed within a certain time limit. Let's say 45 minutes, 60 minutes, stuff like that. I personally don't see a hiccup with podcasting because the user can is actually the navigator. He can control, or she can control, or they can control the podcast however they want, like a joystick. If I want to produce a 5 minute content, I should be able to do it. If I want to do like a 5 hour conversation, also be it. As long as the audience, it makes sense to the audience, the listeners who are engaging with this conversation, they should not have a hiccup. They should not have a problem. Let me hear Leslie's thought. Leslie, how are you? I hope there is no connectivity issues. Leslie? Okay, she might be away or probably at a spot.
I'm here.
Oh, nice. High
I'm here.
five. What's up?
My Wi Fi is terrible where I live. I go 2 steps in my home and it shuts down. How are you, Jason? Sorry.
Phenomenal, actually. It's a beautiful, beautiful evening here in Mumbai. I'm guessing it's a beautiful morning there in Pennsylvania. Where are you, in Pennsylvania or somewhere else?
No, I am in Pennsylvania. This weekend I'll be at the DuPont Country Club for my niece's wedding, which is an hour away, but I am about an hour west of Philadelphia. It's overcast, but this weather with global warming, it's in the 60s. which it should be in the 40s. So it's good to be here, and it's just perfect timing for me to pop on. Thanks, Jason.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. Let's deep dive further. And guys, if you're willing, if you want to come up, just remember you need to have a bio, you need to have a picture, you need to have all those credible things so that we know you are not a bot, an actual human being. So Manoj, I apologize. I don't see a picture. I don't really see much information I can rely on. So, continue listening, guys. I would greatly appreciate if you can invite a few of your friends just to join this conversation. Probably they will get some value. So the first point was definitely on-demand listening. Okay, like I said. Second is the control over the content, short, medium, long, however depth you want to go ahead with the conversation. You can do it. Third thing which I want to say, radio is pretty damn expensive. If you want to actually advertise on radio, it costs you a fortune. The average what I have noticed is around $100 for a segment, like for a let's say a 60-minute segment. If you want to, like, let's say that if I want to do the same broadcast on a radio, I would have to pay around $100 to $150 on a radio, and I would have to pitch in every day, chip in this amount or shred this money every day. And this is also not, I'm not referring to prime time radio. That means not even peak hours. If it's peak hours, it can go even more expensive. And depending upon the reach of a radio station, there is a possibility you would end up spending more money. And this is one of the reason why radios do their own thing, and commercially people try to, or advertisers try to monetize smaller segments so that it's more cost effective. Another benefit to radio stations is that because they have an organic reach locally, okay, so product placements or advertisements or commercials which are done are pretty local, and people would know the whereabouts of all those things. So it makes it super interesting for radio stations. On the other hand, when it comes to podcasting does not really have any sort of barrier to entry. That means as long as you have like an iPhone or an Android phone with a headphone jack attached to it, you can record this using just basic recording applications on your phone, and you can have your episode uploaded. I'm talking about, let's say, an application like Anchor. If you use Anchor, like me, okay, you don't pay anything to have those subscriptions, so that the RSS broadcasts your broadcast on multiple platforms like Spotify, Apple, Google, and other such platforms. So there is no barrier to entry when it comes to broadcasting. The third and the last thing which I want to say, I don't know if third or fourth, I don't remember, but it's about content. So podcasting, unlike radio, it's not generic. It's very focused and specialized if you want to. Most podcasts which you would be following on Spotify, or Apple, or other platforms would be, condensed to a certain industry, specialization, or content type. So what it does, you can personally decide, whether this show caters my interest or no, and choose. When it comes to radio, you don't have that bifurcation. So whatever they are broadcasting or streaming through radio frequency, that's what everyone is gonna get. Not that it's a bad thing, but I'm talking about control. I find that tailored content provided to a niche segment just goes in sync with business. I think it just makes more practical sense, and I think it's trying to harness and try to get the right people. What's the point in you streaming to 9 million people through radio when only 100,000 is actually being benefited? You're losing out on those other people. There's no benefit and reward to it. I want to take a pause there, and I want to just hear Leslie's perspective on this. Leslie.
Yes, no, I am here. I'm walking my dog before I hop in my car, so this is a perfect time for me to speak. The foundation of how the evolution of radio started, and then in tandem with TV following, um, that's a really good question, because I think radio will be around for a while. However, with all of the ways that we can get our word out to the world and really follow those algorithms, and really having more control of our voices being heard, is just something that 50 years ago people would have never imagined. So it is going to be interesting if I could look through a crystal ball, look into a crystal ball and try to figure out, will radio fade away and that light will dim out? Possibly. But I think right now, with people that are, you know, on TV, use and parlay that with the radio, promoting themselves and having that niche audience, whether it's AM or FM. I used to be an FM sales, I used to sell time for radio spots and promoting. And so, but that was years ago, and things are so different. So, this is a really interesting topic of conversation today.
Awesome, awesome. So, thank you so much, Leslie, for that contribution. And I want to, before we welcome Jane, I want to welcome Jane anyways. But so nice to see you, Jane. And before, because you just joined the conversation, I want to give you some context. We're just discussing, whether at some point podcasting is going to replace radio, because I see gradually that happening. Now, I want to actually address the question which you just said, something about, do you think there is a probability of podcasting replacing radio completely? And I want to actually build a discussion around this too. It's not like I hate radio, okay? I love radio because I think it has a lot of potential. It does a lot of things which podcasting does not offer. The first thing which I want to highlight the benefit when it comes to radio, will podcasts replace radio? The first point which I want to make is that they already have an established audience. So that means they are actually dominating this specific medium. I'm talking about radio. And they have been doing it for a really long time. I'm talking about decades. So, so in terms of loyalty, trust, people do find radio more trustworthy, and they many people have habituated to listening to radio from a very young age. So that means some people, while driving, they would just tune into radio by default. It's like a thing, integrated into your DNA. It's like a cultural, like an identity of for people. Okay, the second point which I want to make, podcasters, not all of them actually do their shows live. There is a possibility. In fact, a huge chunk of podcasters actually re-record content, they edit it out and polish it and they upload it. Okay, so if I compare this with radio, radio offers live interactive content. It's not scripted at all. Maybe they do like a basic script, but pretty much, the person, the RJ, the radio jockey, is pretty much live. And while podcasts can be edited for optimal quality, I think radio offers a different kind of excitement and unpredictability of events and on-air interviews. And I feel this is one of the reasons why many podcasters, such as myself, we decided to pivot away, not doing recorded conversation, instead doing live, like how it's happening right now. This is live. I don't have any backup script. Whatever you're hearing is exactly the same way it's going to go on my podcast episode. So the third point which I want to make is that because the radio has a larger reach and they have a very focused, tailored audience which has been following them for a really long time, they give you practical information on things which are happening. For example, weather situations, hurricanes, if there has been an earthquake or if something is happening locally, something exploded, some catastrophe happened, some event at some spot, whatever. So you can actually get those kind of interesting information about communities, local news, which would not be something which would be very accessible and available on podcasts, because podcast is very specifically catered to a subject matter. Not all of them, but most of them are trying to do it things that way. I feel that most people would not really address real or timely events or things which are happening now unless and until it's a part of their show. The last point which I want to make is that radio, unlike podcasting, is much more accessible, because podcasting heavily relies on internet and smartphones, and unlike radio, as long as you have like a receiver, a simple device, very affordable, which has AM and FM frequencies, it makes it very accessible to people who may not be living in a place or location which has internet, rural areas. In India also, there is quite a huge chunk of population which are in rural areas, and if they have to actually listen to podcasts, it would be next to impossible. Plus, they may not get the technology know-how, so radio makes a much more practical sense. So I'm going to pause there, and Leslie, I want to hear your thoughts so far. What do you think?
Well, I absolutely think that I don't feel that podcast is going to per se replace radio, but I think with all the forms of social media where we can get our word out there, like LinkedIn, like all different types of platforms, it's going to actually reset who the viewers and listeners are, as they might want to tune into something that is live. I, per se, with my two podcasts, I do record. So, and we don't know from now over the next 20 years what other virtual um, platforms will come to fruition. Maybe there'll be something that is somewhat like radio, but more interactive, like what we're doing right now. The sky's the limit, and that's what makes it so fascinating. So, yeah, those are my thoughts.
Absolutely, absolutely. Do you see any other benefit when it comes to radio apart from the ones which I just highlighted? Because you see,
Yeah.
I'm 34 years old, and you're much more older than me, Leslie. And during your time, radio was like a very important thing. Not to make you feel old. Don't take me wrong.
Uh, yes, but I am older than you. I'm an early 70s baby. So for me, that was ingrained in my DNA. And listening to my grandparents saying they would sit around the radio when they would listen to The Shadow. And The Shadow was a very popular radio show. And then it evolved into the late 40s. And don't, I'm not sure exactly when, but I think the first TVs came out in the late 40s. And my mom used to tell me how she was the first kid on the block that had a TV in the late 40s when she was a little girl. And people would be standing in front of their living room window just in awe watching this. So you catapult ourselves now to where we are, and it's just amazing. But yeah, I feel that that is such the foundation and the roots of where we all started and was able to see what was going on around the world.
Absolutely. So my next question to you is, Leslie, even though you come from that era wherein radio was hardwired into your DNA, do you still continue listening to radio, or have you pivoted to podcasting, or is it a mixture of both?
I still love NPR because I love the people that are broadcasting. Um, but I do find myself listening, supporting other fellow podcasters. And I've been really into just listening to Siri with all the different genres of music that is at my hands now that I could just tap into. Or when I'm home, I find I'm not watching TV, listening to radio. I'm using my Google Home to listen. I could listen to, as a little girl, we grew up in New York, and I would go to Broadway shows, and I said, "Hey Google, let me hear the lyrics to Godspell." It was a Broadway show, and it just took me back into time, and they were able to upload a recording from the late 70s of the actual Broadway show that was recorded, and now you can listen to it. So I'm fascinated with that. I just know at my age, I'm always trying to break the seal and always curious and wanting to learn. Most people in my age group are somewhat leery about social media and don't really know how to navigate through it. But, I think I'm the nonconformist. I've always been the one that if somebody says no, I do it. So yeah, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very fascinating. I appreciate you giving us that perspective. If you hear background noise, that's how Mumbai sounds, especially in the evening with kids playing around, making loud, weird ass noises. It's really a fun community which we have out here. Thank you, kids. Thank you so much for being a part of the recording. Let's say high five to, people from North America. That's how Mumbai is. So Anyways, I want to actually move ahead with this conversation. I want to, you know, focus on a question, which is, at what point radio shows would become obsolete in comparison with podcasts? Okay, now, based on my research, it's highly unlikely that radio shows are going to go obsolete. Okay, but there are certain factors which I think makes podcasting much more a preferred and popular option in comparison to radio. So let's dissect this further. According to me, customization in terms of, you can skip episodes, download the ones, which you personally like, subscribing to show which kind of falls under your interest category or what appeals to you, and you can reduce down the actual pace. Do you know that you can actually slow down the podcast or increase the podcast speed as well, so that you can listen and fine tune, like how you have this feature on YouTube? Okay, now I think with Anchor introducing video feed also, now videos are also streamed as a part of podcast as well, which makes it even more interesting. So in this way, you don't necessarily have to rely on uploads just on YouTube. You can put it on Anchor and make it accessible and available on Spotify. So I think giving people the option to customize the way how the podcast is consumed, that's a very very interesting thing, which is making podcasts very better or popular in comparison to radio. The second thing which I want to say is advertisement. So many radio stations at this moment of time heavily rely on advertisement to generate revenue. Okay, now because it runs 24 hours around the clock, and the frequency which is being sent out does cost certain level of infrastructure, maintenance, and those kinds. So it's an expensive, proposition, and it's expensive to do the whole thing. So podcasts, on the other hand, can be sponsored by small to medium-sized businesses, or companies who are managed by individuals, and you can actually have smaller, cost-effective ads, and it helps you to personalize and advertise in a very very interesting way. Now, because podcast is very specifically topic oriented, so what it's gonna do is it's gonna actually bring those kind of narrower targeted audience to not only listen and engage, but also to take advantage of those specific advertisement which are happening. And in comparison, like I said, to advertise on radio and comparison to advertising on a podcast, it's a lot cheaper. For an example, to give you some rates, I think currently Spotify pays around $10 per 1,000 downloads per episode, something of that sort. That's the current range. It could be high, could be low. It depends upon what kind of budget the advertiser has and what the advertiser is expecting out of it. Okay, the third point which I want to make is the portability factor. Now, as long as you have a smartphone, tablet, iPads, iPhones, Android phones, or even a computer, you can actually listen to this thing anywhere, everywhere, whenever you like. So if you understand, like, unlike radio, you don't need to have like a receiver to acquire the range. Maybe some smart, I don't even remember. Does our iPhones have radio thing, Leslie? I don't think so. I have not seen that option. Does your current iPhone has like a radio? Okay, she's not there. I'm so sorry. So anybody else, who might be in the listening lounge? Okay, okay, let me bring you up, Leslie. Okay. So I know you are at a spot, which the network keeps going down. So do you have
Yes,
a radio option on your phone to listen to radio on your mobile phone?
I do, but do I use it? No, because I identify my Apple phone with my podcasts, with Shazam and my music, and using it for other applications. And it would be interesting to see if you take a poll, and you probably are very well versed in this because I know you do a lot of research, Jason. I'd be curious to see what the percentages are.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I mean, if you understand my point, guys, there is a lot of benefits when it comes to radio, and there's also a lot of upside when it comes to podcasting as well. It would be next to impossible to predict at when a podcast will replace radio. Might be with technology, but I have also heard about radios being streamed through the internet as well. Okay, a lot of Sirius XM and I don't know many other companies who still do it. Okay, but I don't know how many people are still tuning in using that medium. I still don't know. I there was a time when I was speaking to actually my good friend Girish about this specific subject line, and I was telling him like how mobile technology evolved from GPRS to edge to 2G, then 2.5G, 3G, now 4G, and now 5G. We have not really seen much of a transition with the radio technology. I have not seen it going to the next level. So it's kind of, I'm really curious to know what's going to happen, when those frequencies change. What would be the next thing which technology is going to help? How is AI going to help you to make radio even better? So based on the stats, I think 2021 or 2022, I don't remember exactly. So it's estimated that there were like 2 million active podcasts. I think the numbers may have gone up in 2023. The total number of podcast episodes, I think it currently exceeds around 55 million, and the number of podcast listeners steadily increasing is estimated around 80 million people in US alone. Okay, now US is the most highest market when it comes to podcast consumption. That's also one of the reason I do my show for North America specifically. Okay, so and all these numbers are important, but I feel that as cohesively when we look at this thing at a larger scale, I feel radio has a reach which is still higher in comparison to a podcast. A podcast may eventually get the traction or momentum it has at some point, but I think it's still a slow process, and this is one of the reasons why we have something called as pod fade. If you're new to this term, this actually means usually people, because the barrier to entry is very low or next to nil. People traditionally get into podcasting, do like 6 to 12 episodes, and then they die. When I say die, the podcast dies. They don't see an ROI, they don't see any return on investment or any benefit, and the show does not. So the show just sits there, no episodes, nothing of that sort. As we speak today, in order for me to scale my podcast and get like very very interesting guests on my show, it took me almost 1 year just to plan and be consistent. Okay, now currently I'm doing my season 3, and every season has around roughly 20 to 25 episodes, which I take advantage of, which I utilize. So, what I'm trying to say is that you need to have solid grit and determination to really, upscale this to make it really work. And if you're not willing to do the grind, it's not gonna happen automatically. And this is one of the reason why I think radio has a much more upper hand in comparison to podcasting. I want to take a pause there, and I just want to hear Leslie's thoughts on this so far. And if anybody else is interested in coming up, feel free to raise your hand. We will examine your profile, and let's have this discussion.
Yeah, like you were just mentioning, Jason, there's so many different platforms and so many ways that you can get your podcast uploaded. I personally use Riverside. And if you notice, every month they're changing and evolving and making it so user friendly that anybody could basically, for free, start a podcast. Um, but I haven't done really an in-depth research or marketing and into market research on the percentages, how things are shifting and moving with radio. But I do know, just from my experience being in this world for the last 3 years, I know that everybody has their own unique platform and they will find their audience. But with that, it's interesting when, say, for example, when we're talking about different platforms, people use hashtags. And 2 years ago, everybody said you need 25 or more hashtags. and this way people can identify and start following you. And now people are saying, no, you need 10. So you can get yourself crazy, but
Oh, now,
at
now,
the
now
end
it
of the
has
day,
even went further, Leslie.
right?
Now people say just use
What is it?
5, and I have also heard many new Instagram gurus which are out there saying, guys, hashtag is no longer important. Now you need to tag your
What?
reel the right way. You need to add topics the right way. So yeah, I'm absolutely with you. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut your conversation. Please go ahead.
No, no, I just want to make it short and sweet. What I was just going to say is using the correct adjectives and verbiage. And um, I just feel that at the end of the day, if you have a passion and you listen to what your inner voice is telling you, and you have that drive and you're going with what your heart is, you will find what is going to work for you if you're committed to take the time to really figure out where you should be and what stage you should be on when it comes to social media. And that's what I did over the last 3 years. And we even had, I'll be transparent, a great conversation last night because Jason and I know each other when we were just really kind of getting our feet wet with Clubhouse and social media. Well, the social media I know Jason's been doing for quite some time, but the Clubhouse, that's how we met. And then we branched off and we built a relationship and rapport. I used his services. He helped me out with some marketing strategies. And that's the way and the beauty of what social media is all about with LinkedIn, making those building those relationships and trying to empower and encourage people not to have fear. Because what's the worst thing that can happen? You can look back at it and say, you know what, it wasn't for me, or I just didn't have the time because I was committed to my full time job, or whatever it is. But play around with it, have fun with it. And it's just a fascinating world. I think somebody on Clubhouse said, this is like the wild, wild west. We just don't know where this is going to take us. And it's so ever changing. And all these experts have all their own opinions. And that's the key. Everybody is walking their own walk on this platform. And you just have to find out what is going to make you tick, and what you really want out of this. So, yeah, it's really fascinating.
It is really fascinating. Now, I want to actually highlight the last point of this conversation. This is like a monologue, and I didn't expect it to go beyond 20 minutes, but I want to thank you, Leslie, for joining and making this conversation even more exciting, because I wouldn't have been able to just speak all the way by myself for the next 20 minutes. It would have been hard, and I'm not really used to it. I'm getting used to these things. So I appreciate you being here for support. The last point which I want to make is that let's focus on disruption. How much disruption has podcasting had on the number of industries which are out there? Okay, so let's actually speak on this. So, according to me, podcast has actually disrupted a lot of industries with the way the content is created, distributed, monetized, and it's evolving at such a rapid scale. I feel a lot of traditional industries which are out there, will heavily get impacted. Let's focus on one industry at a time. I want to specifically amplify on the audio technology industry. That means with the rise of podcasting, because earlier podcasting, not podcasting, but radio was very limited to radio stations, and they would probably invest on, microphones, studio equipments once a while, just once in their lifetime, and it stays there for the rest of their shelf, not the life of the radio station. Now, with podcasting coming into place, what it has done, audio technologies like companies which are specialized in microphones, editing softwares, hosting platforms. So it has disrupted the audio technology industry completely and forced them to be much more innovative. If you remember, if you ask me, we used to only have XLR mics. XLR mics are the three pointy thing which you may have seen your DJ plugging things in, when you're at an event or anything. Now, uh, many audio companies were forced to innovate and come up with USB mics. Okay, because they wanted more podcasters to have the flexibility of having plug and play, and they didn't want people to invest on like a studio interface or anything. Okay, now that wouldn't have happened if more people wouldn't have joined the whole podcasting game. So that's one big major disruption which led to innovation and growth, which I really admire. The second thing which I want to highlight is about the book industry. Okay, the business of publishing books. So what I have noticed is that many authors have stopped promoting their work traditionally how they used to do, and more authors have shifted to podcasts. So what they are doing is they are actually speaking about their book in smaller segments and producing it as a part of their podcast, and they are sending this to their listeners and newer targeted audience, encouraging them to buy more books. Okay, so if you look at traditionally how book is marketed in comparison to how it's been done with the use of podcasting technology, I think it's super super cool, and I highly encourage more authors to take advantage of this if you have not really done it. Segment down your content into bit-sized pieces, and speak on it. And in fact, if you have fans or listeners who have actually bought your book, have a conversation with them. Have like a live show. You don't necessarily have to go to libraries and do that thing. What do you call that thing, Leslie? Like they sit at a library and they read the book. What is that thing called?
When they sit, you mean on the microfiche from 100 years ago, or what are you talking about? When they go,
The
when they
thing.
go in and literally pick out a book and sit down like a human
No, no,
being,
I'm
like
saying I'm
we
talking
did?
about
What?
authors. They read their book to the people at a library or I don't know what it's called, but I have noticed many people do it.
Yes, yeah. So it's like an in-person, like meet the author, a book signing. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, yes. Wherein they speak, they actually read the book, or maybe it's called as like a reading thing or whatever. I don't know, but you get the point. What I'm trying to say.
Yes.
All right, all right. So let's go ahead further. When it comes to education, knowledge, I feel podcasting has really nailed it because it's a specialized, very focused content which is being produced specific to industry segment or targeted audience. You don't necessarily have to rely on tactics and strategy, on YouTube. A lot of content which I have learned recently comes from podcasting, just conversation with people and the strategies and recommendation they offer. For an example, I'm a big fan of the podcast on Two Bobs, Leslie, and I keep sending you links. When you hear those
Yes.
marketing podcasts, strategic podcasts and the discussions they are having, don't you think it's educational, informative, and really, really interesting? And I don't think you can get that content on YouTube. Am I right?
they, they have such insight and their years of experience, and we're talking about very well versed men in the industry that has profited and are very successful. So they do bring a wealth of knowledge, and it's interesting, and I just will make it really short and sweet, how the industry, the people acting industry, have really jumped on board with podcasting because they have their millions of viewers that follow them as actors. And now they are streaming into podcasting, like Gwyneth Paltrow, who has this amazing mega multi-million dollar company called Goop. And her podcast is Goop. And she gets the most amazing, incredible people on cutting edge on functional nutrition and health. And that's what I'm all into.
Oh, Goop. G
So
O
that's
O
awesome.
P. Goop.
Yes,
Oh, this
check
is by
out
Goldman
Goop.
Sachs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I know this podcast. I have heard it. This is pretty cool. The Goop podcast is pretty cool. That's a great point which you highlighted. Go ahead, Leslie. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cut you.
No, I'm just saying. So for us newbies that maybe not have quite a following, it's going to take more perseverance and more structure. Look at the two football players that were playing against each other. They were brothers, and now their podcast is skyrocketing because of the Eagles that lost. Well, I'm not an Eagles fan, even though I live in Pennsylvania. I'm still a New Yorker at heart. But look at, like, for example, look at how they just catapulted now to another level. I don't know the name of their podcast, but it was just on. I was listening to Andy. I like Andy Cohen. That's like mindless, like Bravo. he has a channel which is not per se it's radio, but it's Sirius XM. So anyway, yeah, that's really what I wanted to bring to the forefront.
Absolutely. Those are some great points. The last thing which I want to highlight, what podcast has, which industry podcast has disrupted, it has to be media and entertainment for sure. Because I want you guys to understand the media and the entertainment business heavily relies on monetizing their content through advertisement. With podcasts coming into place, what it has done, it has actually chewed away a major chunk of their advertising revenue because it's segregated them completely. So now advertisers, they have more reasons to invest, not just traditional media and entertainment line of advertisement, or marketing and advertisement in general. They can use other mediums such as podcasts for promoting their businesses or services through that medium. And the thing about podcasters is that because they are fairly new, and not speaking about all of them, but people who generally start off, imagine if you get a sponsorship deal from a company, and even if they are giving you, let's say, $10, I'm just saying $10 per shout out. Okay, if you do 12 episodes, that's like $120. You're going to be producing the show anyways. And if you're going to be making the 120 USDs on that, isn't that a cool deal? According to me, it's a fucking bloody good deal. So, so that's what I feel, and those are my inputs and takes. And I welcome people to have questions and answers. So, if you're down there in the audience, and if you want to actually ask me any sort of question and have a conversation, you're welcome to come up, and have this discussion, because we would be wrapping up this space very soon. This was just a temporary monologue I was just experimenting with, just to see if I'm capable of just doing independent shows, unlike just guest interview, just exploring that space also. Leslie, what are your final thoughts on what I said?
Well, this was so impromptu, and that's what is the beauty of LinkedIn. People that are comfortable in this space, that have a wealth of shares or just a little bit of experience. We just popped on, and I think we had a lot of great tips and tools, and especially with you being so well versed in doing your research with the percentages and how everything is changing, has really made this conversation really awesome. So I want to thank you for having me on. I didn't realize that I was going to have an hour break before I head out to my next appointment. So thank you, Jason.
Absolutely, absolutely. So lovely to have you, and trust me, you're like a life savior, and God sent you towards me while doing this impromptu.
Oh,
And I mean, this is pretty exciting. I'm glad that I was able to still roll around with it. So there's something which I like you two guys to take away from this conversation, is that I don't think you should really care about the difference between podcasting and radio. Ultimately, it depends upon your personal interest and needs. You as an individual have your personal needs, and you like things a certain way. If it's radio, that helps you to achieve that needs, stick to radio. If it's podcasting, then stick to podcasting. If it's a mixture of both, I think you should go ahead with both. As technology develops, okay, year on year, you will see some certain level of enhancements in terms of technology about audio broadcasting and video broadcasting. Those things are going to continue happen. The way content will be produced over audio, be it radio or podcast, it's also going to pivot and change, okay, over time. If you notice that habitual, like as you're listening and engaging to this conversation on this live LinkedIn as well as on Clubhouse, you will realize that you are focusing on my words, you are hearing what I'm saying, you are able to understand my emotions, my point of view, and my perspective. 10 years down the line, if I go backwards, 10 years behind, I don't think audio had the same significance as it has today. So I think there's a lot of potential, be it radio or podcasting. There's still a long way to go. And encourage you to join this thing as early as possible. Be an early adopter so that you can see the benefit, leverage on it, and build something beautiful. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have anything else. Leslie, do you have anything you like to share before we wrap?
I hope that this could be a beginning to something really great, that we can collaborate and we could share our our love and our passion for everybody. So thank you, Jason. Have a great day.
Absolutely. You guys take care of yourself. Have a lovely morning, evening, wherever you're in the world. Sending love to you and everyone else.